Hello and welcome to the workshop for a little bit of a deep dive into the history of this lovely French Châtellerault 1924-29 light machine gun. What I'd like to do today is to talk about more or less the origin story, where it comes from, what other designs were in the running at the time, some of the mechanical quirks, and also discuss the composition of the combat squad, particularly 1939-1940, which is my area of interest. So, let's begin. So, as I'm sure you all know, at the end of World War I, France decides to embark on an ambitious armaments renewal program. Time to wipe the slate clean and start from scratch, including the cartridge. And perhaps the most successful outcome of that program was the light machine gun. It was also the earliest one to really get off the ground in terms of development. In 1921, the list of requirements comes out, and honestly they're not that outlandish, perfectly sensible things. What we have is that it should weigh approximately 9 kilos, it should be air-cooled with a 60 centimeter barrel including the chamber. Rate of fire is 300 to 500 rounds per minute, preferably more towards the 300 end. It can be belt-fed or magazine-fed. Magazines should be between 20 and 30 rounds. It should be able to be easily manufactured and not require any exotic materials or exotic manufacturing techniques. It should be simple to disassemble using, for example, a cartridge as a disassembly tool. Quick change barrel, that's something they didn't seem to insist on too much. This one has an easy change barrel, but not really a quick change barrel. It should be well protected from the mud, so lessons learned from World War I. And this one is extremely well protected once it's stowed in its carry configuration. Really well done there. It should have a bipod and or monopod, removable or fixed. It should have a strap to enable walking fire because it's still a thing. Full auto and single shots. Also, the safety should be easy to operate and should be obvious to the user when it's on or off. That they spectacularly failed at because it's a tiny safety and it's really easy to forget it's even there, whether it's on or off. There's not much difference between the two positions, to be honest. So that was the state of play for the tender in 1921. And finally in 1923 there came a refined set of requirements once they'd been through some testing and found the things that they really liked and would quite like to see on the final configuration. And those were that it should have an aperture sight, surprise, cocking handle on the right, ejection should be laterally, left or right. Rate of fire is set now at 400 rounds per minute. If a rate reducer is used to achieve that, it should be non-adjustable and, if possible, tamper-proof because soldiers are soldiers. And finally, they decide that it should be using magazines, which can be loaded from the top or the bottom. So, let's see who the contenders were. So before I give you a quick overview of the various trials rifles and prototypes, just two things. Firstly, the cartridge, the 7.5 French that we know today, and its predecessor hadn't actually been created then yet. So for the purpose of the trials, they required just that it be in the 7 to 8 millimeter range, 8mm Mauser. Also the American cartridge, as it was called, so 3006 or whatever it ought to be, was just fine. And also I'm going to mention some model numbers which may or not be right. I've tried to cross-reference as far as I could, but my sources tend to mix up actual model numbers and simply model numbers associated with the year they were tested. So if there are some experts watching who can maybe clarify exactly what they are, by all means mention that in the comments. So, I'm not going to go in any particular order, but I'll start with the Madsen light machine gun. This was sort of subject to a sort of love-hate relationship with France since World War I, where it was used in very small numbers. It kept on popping in and out of the trials, as in, yeah, we like it, but no, it's not exactly what we're looking for, so we'll dismiss it, but we'll just keep it on the sideline just in case, and then it will be dragged back in and tested again, and then partially rejected, and this went on for about 2 years, and then in 1923, finally they decided, no, we're not going to have it. The main problem was the bizarre operating system in terms of compared to the standard, so they were thinking in terms of training the common conscript compared to a sort of relatively easy linear gas piston system here. And also I didn't like that in certain models and cases you would have a cartridge left somewhere in the action. So that was considered a significant safety hazard, understandably. So model numbers, I have seen one with model 1922 stamped on the receiver. I don't know whether that is a thing. They did also produce them, Saint-Étienne did produce parts for the trials, so that could also come from there. The other one that was dismissed rather quickly was the Lewis light machine gun. Now this has nothing to do with the World War I light machine gun. This is the so-called shock rifle, which is operates on a gas trap. Here's a patent concerning that, and from descriptions it seems to be that they were expecting it to explode at any moment. Very fragile, very harsh recoil, so that was rapidly dismissed as being unsuitable. There was a rapid redesign to make it a conventional gas piston system, but that didn't seem to improve anything significantly. So that was basically dropped within the first year like a hot potato. Then comes the Hotchkiss, 1922, basically the successor to the Hotchkiss portative. Now this was offered in both strip-fed and magazine-fed options, and it was the magazine-fed system was significantly less reliable than the belt feed. And as I mentioned earlier, in 1923 they decided to focus exclusively on mag feed, so I'm guessing that they were not able to increase the reliability significantly to be considered for the closing part of the trials. Apart from that, it seemed to have functioned perfectly well. Next we have the Berthier series of rifles. It gets a bit complicated here. Now this is Berthier, this is General Pasha Berthier. He was in Turkish service actually. This is André Virgile Paul Marie Berthier and not Émile Berthier of rifle fame. So General Berthier was extremely active in design of machine guns, even in the First World War and before that. He had varying success. Then he eventually struck up a partnership with Vickers in the UK, and so some of the designs submitted were Vickers Berthier designs, and some of them were designs that were tinkered with by manufacturer Châtellerault, who produced some of the prototypes. And there was there a Monsieur Lebel who tinkered a little bit more with it, and we'll see how that is important in a moment. Problems with that seem to have simply been reliability and susceptibility to ingress of mud and dirt and all that, which they were extremely fixated on, far more than I had expected. It comes back as a reason for rejection quite often. Then we have the MAS 1922 and 1923, which are basically straight up, well, mechanically straight up copies of the BAR. Now some of you are probably thinking, how can they do that? Well, actually the BAR as such was only patented in France, was applied for in April 1924, so after the whole trials and approval. So there was no infringement issue at the time. However, they never seemed to get it quite right. It's one of these classic sort of reverse engineering type things where it just didn't work as it should. So that eventually failed. But they also absolutely loved the BAR. This is at troop level. They've used it in World War I, they're familiar with it, they like the cartridge. There's one quote in there that one soldier said, "This is the perfect light machine gun." So this was tested in various forms. The last one I have seen with a stamping among the patent details is model 1919. As you can see here, it's got the vent ribs along the barrel and a sort of less wrap around front handguard. So France was pretty much ready to adopt it straight from the go, but Colt and Browning said, fine, you can have a license, but it's going to cost you $2 million. Not really a sort of sensible amount for a immediate post-war economy, and even if it wasn't. What's curious to me is that FN was also offering their variant of the BAR, but nothing ever came of it, and I assume that there was some kind of anti-competition clause between FN and Colt, so they couldn't undercut, because Belgium could have quite easily produced in-house and shipped to France. It wasn't very far for that, and they wouldn't even need a license. So perhaps the BAR experts could clarify that. It's quite interesting. So yes, BAR was basically trialed all the way till the end until this deal was fell through. So having explored all the competitors, where does this come from? When the deal for the BAR falls through, basically Châtellerault comes forward and says, well, what if we build our version or interpretation of the BAR, including bits and pieces that we've picked up from the other trials rifles that we just happen to produce here in-house, then we don't have any intellectual property issues, no licensing issues, and we can produce it much cheaper. So the trials committee said, well, go ahead then. And within a year, so within 1923, they had produced the first prototype, and it was tested side by side with the BAR, and it was judged to be preferable, not just due to cost issues. It was deemed more accurate. The rate of fire was closer to what they were looking for. It was easier to disassemble, which is very much true. Also, the mag change was easier, although there was some discussion between the infantry and the cavalry. The infantry quite liked or preferred the top loading. Cavalry quite liked the bottom loading, but top loading won through in the end. It has a bolt hole open. It has a very simple trigger mechanism, and it has far better mud protection. Again, that keeps on coming back. So it was then very, very quickly adopted. There were just a couple of points they had to refine. And in January 1924, we have then the adoption of the fusil mitrailleur model 1924. So let's get it ready in the shooting configuration and see what we've got. So we have the rear sight here, flips open, mag catch, and then we have the dust cover for the mag well and the ejection port. Actually works off an open bolt. We have two triggers. Front one is semi-auto, so here with every shot you go forward and it'll lock back and reset. Now normally it's non-reciprocating, so this would be forward obviously once you've charged. And for a bit of ASMR, if you have used the rear trigger, it'll go backward until you release the trigger. Now, it works simply gas operated, very, very simple system. We have the gas port here, which does 90 degrees, and you have the nipple here on which the piston cup sits on and reciprocates in this gas tube here. Now this is just an access plug for cleaning. There's no different sort of port sizes or anything, so it's non-adjustable. So field stripping is extremely easy. You just need to remove the cross pin here at the back, which has a handy little winding arm. Take that out. Then you just pivot trigger housing down. You don't need to remove it. And remove the stock assembly. There's lots of interesting things going on in here, so we'll come back to that. Next, we have what we see here is the ejector, which is just dovetailed into the side of the receiver here, and it goes all the way through. So it seems fragile, but it's well supported, and at the back of here you've got the back of the stock, so it's not going anywhere. But of course it means that if it breaks, you just need to remove the back assembly, pull it out, slot a new one in, and you're good to go. Incidentally, the new one, or a new one, is lodged in a compartment there, as is a replacement crosspin should you lose it. So once we've done that step, we just pull out, oops, and try not to crush our feet, pull out the piston assembly. Here's a slot here for the ejector. So we can strip this further by taking the lower pin out. The top pin is captive to the bolt assembly, and here we go, that's the firing pin. It is replaceable. It's got the typical staked pin here, so you can't just fiddle with it and lose bits, so that would be an armourer's job to replace the firing pin should it break. And the bolt, nothing special here. I've got the extractor claw, also very easily replaceable. You need to push it in and out, and it would come flying out, but I won't do it on camera. Anyway, 2-minute fix, if that. We have the locking shoulder here at the back, because in locked position it rises up and it locks against shoulder, my actual patented pokey, the shoulder which is here, which is incidentally also replaceable. So another clever thing they did was to put the recoil spring and guide inside the gas piston, and that works against this front claw here on the trigger assembly, and to restore the recoil energy. So let's go back to what's happening in the stock. Now, as I mentioned, at the back here we have a compartment for the things you're most likely to lose, cross pin and the spare ejector. Then we have this catch here, which is for the rear monopod. That's taken straight off the Berthier, if you remember the picture I showed you. And that is extendable and can be fixed also at any distance along there. Now there are some numbers on it. Here in tens and along the flat. I don't really know what they refer to. I've had a look in the manual, there's no reference to them apart from them being there, so I assume they are there as a reference guide. If you are fixing in a certain position, you can remember, you can dial it in, and for repeatability. So that's that, and then we have all sorts of stuff going on here in the front, and this is actually all part of the rate reducer system. So at the top here we've got a sprung buffer, and all that does is soak in a bit of the recoil energy on the back of the bolt. And then we have this sear catch here, and we have a reciprocating mass. And the way this works is that when the gas piston reaches end of travel, it's going to hit this mass, which is going to recoil here inside a tube, and as it does so, it releases this sear catch upwards, which is powered by this little spring plunger here in the back of the trigger assembly. So once that's out of the way, this is free to rise up into this position, and that actually catches the entire assembly and holds it for a fraction of a second. Once the mass reaches end of travel, it'll spring back up, force the sear catch back down again, and release the gas piston and bolt assembly back forward. So if you're into horology, this is very, very similar to an escapement system. If we consider the gas piston here as the escape wheel, this as the anchor, and this as the oscillator, you've pretty much got the same system. This moves backwards and forwards on its own and catches and releases the escape wheel, as it were. So now we've done the theory, let's see how the squad was organised. So the most important member of the team is of course the gunner. Now he has, like machine gun, in his haversack he has 3 loaded magazines, only to be used in extremis, and also the monopod. Now use of the monopod was basically compulsory unless the terrain made it impossible. And shooting position was legs straight back, in line with the gun, and away you go. Now if you couldn't use the monopod, you have the shoulder strap, and again you've got a nice stable position. So the next most important person is of course the loader. He just has to make sure the machine gun is fed at all times. He has a pack of 10 preloaded magazines, and for his own personal defense he has a pistol, normally a ruby, with 3 loaded mags. He is also responsible for the cleaning gear for the LMG. All the mechanical spare parts are the responsibility of the gunner. Hey. So next we have a team of 3, which is the purveyor and the 2 resuppliers. Now, purveyor ensures a continuous supply of loaded magazines to the loader, and he also takes the empties away. And the resuppliers have to make sure that they can get the loaded magazines from the other members of the group, and also they can resupply, refill the empties. And they have a loading guide for this, which just goes over the mags, and they use the standard stripper clips to reload. And they have about their person 4 loaded magazines and a pack of 250 stripper clips. Well, 250 rounds in stripper clips. And in terms of personal armament, they would have a Berthier carbine if the squad was armed with Berthiers, or a MAS 36 if the squad was fully armed with MAS 36. And they would have 45 rounds of personal armament. And they would also be the ones responsible for getting ammo from another squad if they were running out. Next we have 3 Fusiliers, 90 rounds of personal ammo and 1 LMG mag. Next we have a Grenadier, which has 1 loaded FM mag, 45 rounds of personal ammo, a VB launcher for the rifle grenades, and he'll be armed either with a MAS 36 if the squad is armed with a MAS 36, or a Lebel if the squad is armed with a Berthier. There'll be 1 squad commander, usually a sergeant, has a rifle, 45 rounds of personal ammo and 1 loaded FM mag for emergencies. And let's not forget the poor corporal who's actually carrying out all the orders. He is similarly armed with a rifle, 45 rounds of personal ammo and an emergency FM mag ready to go. Something I forgot to mention while I was out in the garden is this strap, which is made of a considerable amount of cow. So this should be basically on the gun at all times, as it stipulates in the manual, basically so that if the gunner has to change position, it's already slung and off you go. Now, it also has this substantial hook here near the front buckle and a D-ring halfway along. Now, the purpose of this is that you can quickly hook the 2 together, and it allows you to do this. So I think that about covers the machine gun. I could go on and on because there's all sorts of gadgets and accessories that would come with this as an integrated system. Adaptations for anti-aircraft use, funny and amusing anti-aircraft mounts, vehicle mounts, fortress modifications, all sorts of things for paratroopers and ski troops. The list goes on, perhaps another time. What I do quickly want to mention are the production numbers. So the initial batch chambered for the initial 7.5 cartridge, they managed to make 45,000 of those before June 1940. Then when they made the switch to the 1929 cartridge, they produced another 90,000 before June 1940. And then post-war, they made another 53,000, more or less, until 1957, where they switched to the AA-52. Now, the conversion of the initial batch was done in a controlled way. It wasn't all done at the same time. The conversion would be done alongside the production of the new patterns, and in some cases some sort of remote far-flung units would continue to use the initial 1924 pattern simply because they wouldn't be getting any 7.5 ammo anytime soon, and they'd produced a substantial amount of the first pattern ammunition that may as well be used up. So they would be delivered all the ammo, and when that ran out, they would get their LMGs recalled, modified, and off they go for the M29 pattern. Now, I'm not just wearing this because I think it's gorgeous. It's just a little nod to the extremely long service life, typical of a French firearm, of course. This starts its life obviously in mid-1920s and goes through all the interwar period. In wartime, it's still in service with the Vichy government. Then post-war, it goes straight to Algeria. Then we have Indochina and all sorts of interventions in sandy places. And then when the AA-52 appears, it goes gradually into reserve service and ends officially its life in the gendarmerie in 2004. Why 2004? Well, simply then that all production of 7.5 by 54 ceased, and then obviously it's time to move on. I believe that most of the ones that were still in the gendarmerie armories were simply turned over to Saint-Etienne, who deactivated them by welding them up in atrocious ways. But this one, at least, is safe with me. So, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your patience. It's been long, but hopefully interesting. And thank you all to all our patrons for all your support to make all this kind of content possible, to allow us to show and shoot all this stuff. And all you other guys who are supporting us through your comments and interesting conversations and points you raise. And for all that, here's some more Dakka.
Weißt du, wann ich das genau habe? Für mich okay.
Was ist jetzt das da?
Das ist das Gleiche.
Oh, das Gleiche?
Ein anderer Lauf.
Ah, okay.
Anderer Lauf, kleiner und ein Laufwerker.
Ja.
So wegklemmen einfach.
Oh, das ist lecker.
Hast du das kaputt laufen? Also, der war Knopf am Nein.
Normalerweise nicht so wie die kurz so lang. Normalerweise die direkt ab.
Bist du umgeben, go?
Weißt du noch, wie es geht, Björn? Ja.
Kopfladen.
Schick uns mal nicht so blöd.
Da kannst du hängen dran. Wieder auf dem normalen Feld.
Das Magazin rauf. Was? Wem? Ha!